Good morning, everybody. Isn't it wonderful seeing all this technology, these beautiful maps up on the wall today? It's fantastic. I'm from Samoa in the South Pacific. We're not so good at these sort of things. But it reminds me, too, that when Samoa was about to get its independence in 1962, the New Zealand government, which was administering the territory, said, you know, we better bring these islanders into civilization to teach them a little bit about how to run their own country. So they rounded up all these senior civil servants, took them to New Zealand and said, this is our parliament. And the Samoans would say, it doesn't look very sustainable. There's big walls, and besides, it's very ugly. They'd show them the road systems. They said, these are our road systems, our highways, where we get our goods to market. And the Samoans would say, you know what? We could move it much quicker by canoe and less fuel being used. So they refused to be sort of amazed by anything they were shown. So this little officer from the Department of Foreign Affairs took them into a room, a lot smaller than this, and he put up a world map on the wall. Then he said, okay, this is over here, that's the United States of America, that's Latin America, and up there is Alaska, then all the way over is Russia, this is China over here, and then this is Australia here, and this is New Zealand down here. And he said, these little dots here, that's Samoa, that's where you come from. There was a silence in the room, and then the Samoan stood up at the back and he said, who drew that map? It's been the case for like that for many of us in the small island states, but I'll teach you a word since you've learned so much technology here today. The word is Moana, M-O-A-N-A, Moana. Can you say it? Moana. That's what we in the Pacific call the 40 million square miles of the Pacific Ocean is called Moana to us. We don't have the fancy technology, but we established regular maritime traffic across Moana over 2,000 years ago. The British historian Toynbee said the fact that Polynesians traverse the ocean regularly with these little craft was a technological feat which could only be equaled by interstellar traffic. So are we getting to understand the technology that these people knew? You'll hear from Prime Minister Puna this afternoon about how the fact that we still do send voyaging craft from the Pacific all the way to California and back without navigational aids. You see, we look at Moana, not like you. You tend to see Moana as little outcrops of rock in this huge expanse of sea. We, for centuries, for generations, we see them as the tops of mountains. We know what's underneath. We know the movements of Moana. Now science has confirmed what we have always said, that the movement of swells and the intermovement of swells in the depths determines how far you can go and also can warn us of what is to come. So we tend to look at it as a sort of a liquid land, if you like. Get used to the term aquatic continent, because that's how we really see it. And that's what we would like to do more and more. And technology is allowing us to do this sort of thing. Now, it's wonderful to see all this technology, but you know, my ignorance of technology is so great, it has to be respected. There's an MSc course on it coming up. But there is no doubt that marrying the technology of what we know and what we've heard here, combined with traditional knowledge, can perhaps point the way to how we can all survive better in the so-called disasters, so-called natural disasters that affect us all today. Because of their anger at seeing what was happening to Moana in the Pacific, in Moana, the Alliance of Small Island States was set up to focus attention on what was happening to the oceans of the world. And against enormous difficulty and opposition, the Alliance of Small Island States got it inscribed at the agenda of Rio '92. Huge opposition. And anyway, it's been there ever since. So it was the Alliance of Small Island States that brought the issue of climate change to the world agenda. It's been there ever since, but now it looks like islands are being forgotten again. As President Bill Clinton said, with the carbon trading, all this has been taken, it's been commercialized, assetized, digitalized, whatever you call it. And so very bright young men and women in shiny pinstripe suits in Frankfurt, London, New York, and Chicago are making a lot of money out of it, but we're still looking for help. So, but there is good news on the horizon. The United Nations International Disaster Relief Initiative is doing a lot to look at consolidating international responses. So I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, who's Elena Molin Valdez, and she would like to speak after a video which is going to run now on some of the initiatives of the United Nations. Roll the tape. Always wanted to say that.
Disasters affect on average 200 million people every year. This year, by September 1st, 2010, 255 million people have already been affected and 236,000 have been killed. Most of them live in cities. Our cities are growing, urban risks are growing too. Today, floods cause half of all disasters worldwide and 84% of all disaster deaths. Twelve of the world's 16 largest cities are located near coasts. Crowded cities, unsafe constructions, lack of urban planning, destruction of natural buffers, climate change. These all combine to expose more people to disasters. Over half of the world's population now live in cities, many on floodplains, unstable slopes and fault lines. 1 billion live in slums. We are all at risk. Haiti's Port-au-Prince and many cities in Chile experienced severe earthquakes in 2010. Haiti's magnitude 7 earthquake killed 1 person out of every 15 affected. Chile's earthquake was 500 times more powerful, but yet only 1 in every 595 people affected died. Shantytowns with limited regulations compounded the disaster in Haiti. We can make our cities more resilient. We all have a role to play. Mexico City, Mumbai, Amman, Durban and others have already joined the UN ISDR Making Cities Resilient campaign. They are working through 10 actions to make their cities ready and to integrate disaster risk reduction into their urban planning. Local and national governments, enterprises and community groups can work together to get their cities ready. What are you doing to make your city resilient? Join the campaign.
Good morning. A few words before we have our panel on resilience. We have spoken about resilience yesterday, and the panel previous to this one spoke about resilience of biodiversity, oceans, natural systems. Resilience is also something that we manage ourselves, the capacity of systems, societies, cities, groups to be able to absorb shocks, hazards, deal with them, accommodate, and then recover to the better. That's what we define as resilience and resilient cities. And it's also something that's necessary to build sustainability, the capacity of being resilient. And since we are here to discuss information and how we move towards the next phase of sustainable development in Rio+20, I thought it was an important point to make that cities and local governments, municipalities and communities are really the basis for building this resilience. One of the mayors that's part of this campaign was launched last year. It started with 10 mayors signing up mid-2010, and now we have over 1,000 cities and local governments joining this initiative. One of the mayors who actually won an award, both in the Philippines, where he's from, and globally, the UN Sasakawa Award, won and worked on one big slogan in his campaign, and that's think big, start small. Communities build nations. And that's the bottom line for what I would like to stress in my little introductory talk to the panel here. Think big, start small, start with the people and start with the knowledge and the information. The previous speaker was talking about data and using data for science. I would say data and science need to be, and for action, data and science need to be used for decision making and needs to be also absorbing that knowledge about the environment, about the risks, about the needs and the situation in a specific area. So what do we do? I was introduced by our chairman as coming from the United Nations. We have something called the International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, Resilience, and we have a framework for action that all governments that are members of the United Nations adopted in 2005. It's called the Hyogo Framework for Action, and its name is Building the Resilience of Nations and Communities to Disasters. This is what we have now tried to push down to be able to build this bottom-up approach to building resilience and applying risk information, risk assessments, and data. It's basically built on 5 priorities. The big objective of this framework is to substantially reduce the losses to disasters on the social, in lives, first of all, and social and economic assets. How can we measure this? And that's where the information comes in to stand. Well, we need to be able to account for losses. And how do we get to that? 3 goals. One is to introduce risk reduction and risk assessment into sustainable development planning and programming. 2 is to build institutions, and 3 is to have this approach already from the emergency management phase. And the priorities are now being translated into city resilience and city actionable essentials for cities to take part into their strategic planning, urban development, and service lines as cities. Many, as I said, we have 193 member states of the United Nations now. I think there is 30,000 or more local governments in the world. So by addressing local governments, we are actually addressing people, the first front line, both for responding to any crisis and disaster, but also to actually, the local governments are those that regulate most of the permits, building construction, land use, waste management, and all these issues that we saw in the pictures before creating disasters. So the fact that we are building a movement from a moment to a movement was the slogan yesterday, and I think this is what we are doing also, building resilience to disasters as part of the national capacity and the local action. I just wanted to make one point also on information. Yesterday and today we have seen wonderful pictures of data and maps and information systems, and this is what we are striving for, to have systems that can help us take decisions by processing a lot of data. I was just in the Philippines a week or two back, and this picture is from San Francisco, Cebu, in a municipality of 50,000 people. Very, very effective in terms of turning around poverty, food security, etc., through a very simple notion of the mayor that I mentioned before. Think big, act small, to be able to change. Starting at community level in what they call puroks in the Philippines. Cities are divided in barangays. Barangays are in smaller units called puroks. This is the purok system in San Francisco and the information system that they are using to identify their problems, counting their people, checking on education, checking on the different Millennium Development Goals and the Hyogo Framework for Action priorities. Purok by purok, there are 100 puroks in San Francisco, and this is the information system that they use. Every month they report back to the barangay and to the mayor's office, to the municipality. This is the computing system that they use. Handwritten sheets, month by month, that are being computed at municipality level. I just wanted to make that type of reflection, because how can we help communities who actually really are using the application of information? We just heard from the Samoa example as well. The information is there, the knowledge is there, the wisdom is there, and especially the knowledge about the local conditions into decision-making tools that can help that level and going it up to city level. This is the Millennium Development Goals in a snapshot and the Hyogo Framework for Action at local level. Information being used. So just as a final point, what I wanted to discuss further in the panel and for us to think of as an outcome of this Eye on Earth Summit to take to Rio Plus 20 Sustainable Development Summit in June next year, it's really what kind of information support do we need and how can we make it work for people and for decision making. Science is one area which is definitely necessary, and we heard a passionate introduction on that subject just before me, but it's also about using the data and the information to take decisions at local level and working between national and local in an easy way. So taking stock of risk, lost databases, understanding the risks, that's number one, and the tools needed for that will differ from where we are, depending on where we are, the abilities of people to manage that data. But by computing it up, at least at national level and even at global level, we can see a picture. Of course, this risk information is being used for risk analysis and for risk management, also when it comes to dealing with disasters and relief situations. Actually, there is no such thing as natural disaster. That's my other point. There is no such thing as natural disasters. There are natural hazards, man-made hazards, many types of hazard, but the disaster is really an issue of exposure. Exposure of people, exposure of assets, and the way that we deal with these hazards. That's when we talk about we can see an increase in number of disasters, because we have an increase in exposure and an increase in vulnerability. There is a lot of things being done, absolutely, but because of population pressure, and rapid urbanization in many areas, we are not catching up with the needs of managing these risks in the same way. We are creating risks quicker than we are able to deal with them. And finally, what we would seek this summit and the initiatives that are coming out of the Eye on Earth Summit is how can these information tools help local governments to do self-assessments, have their dashboards, and help city-to-city learning and people-to-people learning for a better and safer and more resilient city. That's my story for today, and I wanted to be brief and let you think a little bit through these issues, and thank you very much, Mr. Lele.
Thank you, Elena. There's no such thing as a natural disaster. Take it home with you. Nature has had a very bum rap over the years because of this. The floods in Pakistan, thousands killed. It was not so much the flooding, it was because of the lack of maintenance on the disaster response mechanisms. Katrina, New Orleans, you know what happened there, right? It was the levees that broke, which were made by these charismatic megafauna called Homo sapiens. Now, let's bring on our panel, Juliana Rotic. Juliana is a whiz at grassroots use of technology to deal with the catastrophes that affect us. She will tell you later about how she worked at the grassroots level to locate people under the rubble after the earthquake in Haiti. And she will also tell you how with very simple mechanisms she is able to connect Kenya with that other great rugby playing nation, Samoa, through androids. And we have also Matthias Schale. Matthias from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Matthias' job, of course, is to pick up after the mess that we leave around because of our lack of preparedness. Milan Dulgerov is from the World Bank. He links climate change to disaster response. And he also has a lot of money, so we need him right here. Now, first of all, Milan, you're in last, so you can tell us how, the World Bank comes up with these wonderful macro, whatever you call them, thingies, but how important is it for people on the ground to understand what it is you're talking about to make this happen?
Well, it is essential in many ways. Without engagement in the ground, without community mobilization, without governance mobilization, no amount of money can address the needs of communities, of countries, of society at large, when it comes to dealing with natural hazards and responding to disasters. The challenge is compounded by the fact, as Helena mentioned, that there is enormous variability in terms of on-the-ground capacity between communities, between municipalities, between countries when it comes to capacity to absorb information, capacity to access information, capacity to turn information into actionable guidance for reducing exposure to natural hazards. And that's one of the challenges that hopefully could come out of this summit, a really dedicated focus to take the superb technology that we have been exposed to in the last 3 days, the superb applications that we have seen, down to the users, down to enable country managers, to enable community coordinators, to enable municipal managers to turn this superb technology into actionable guidance and improve the resilience of their communities.
Communities in action. This is where Juliana comes in, because how did you do it, Juliana? How did you sit in Kenya and save the lives of people in Haiti? What did you do with Ushahidi?
So it bears explanation a little bit about what Ushahidi is. The word Ushahidi actually has some Arabic roots. The word means testimony or witness in Swahili. So we started out in Kenya in 2008, and we created a platform that allows people to gather information, to collect data, and to do that via mobile phones, via email, via Twitter. Whichever way they can provide information, they're able to report and say this is what is going on. When the Haiti earthquake happened, one of my colleagues, Patrick Meyer, who's currently our director of crisis mapping, and David Kobia, who is our head of technology, had a phone call. And they set up the platform, replicated it, and made sure it was up and running in just a few hours. What happened next really inspired us and it changed how we look at humanitarian aid information gathering. What happened next was we had a lot of contributions from other developers, and we worked hand in hand with other organizations like Instead and Frontline SMS, and also Digicel in Haiti. to set up a short code number 4636 that enabled Haitians to text in their needs. One particular case where that text message ended up in the queue that was being sifted through by Haitian diasporas, that message contained the call for assistance, and another message contained the call for water. So that information was then mapped so that you could indicate as close as possible where that need is. And that feed was provided to other first responders to complement their sources of information. I mention complement because the organizations such as the Red Cross working on the ground have specific systems that they use. Our goal with Ushahidi is to make the system more efficient for them so that they do not have to look through all the Twitter messages that are mentioning Haiti or Japan or any other disaster, that we can find the signal from the noise for them and help them be more effective in providing assistance. So that's how it worked.
Thank you, Juliana. How important is it to try to effect behavioral change, Matthias, when you're working with the International Red Cross and Red Crescent? What can you tell us about that?
Well, a couple of thoughts. May I first say that, picking up on from where Juliana just left things, I think information used properly can save lives. And let me give you 2-3 examples, one negative, 2 positive ones. The negative one is the Horn of Africa crisis. We knew towards the end of last year that there would be a crisis, and we launched appeals with others, the UN system, but there was no response from the international community. So it's an example that demonstrates information was there, but it wasn't used. There was no reaction. And it's an example of where we need behavioral change. Decision makers do need to take properly analyzed information serious. The 2 positive examples are one from Bangladesh. When the Indian Ocean tsunami hit there a couple of years ago, we had trained up volunteers on the ground through the Bangladeshi Red Crescent, and information reached them early enough. So some of them, many of them actually, went out on bicycles to alert people that water was coming and that they needed to escape and reach higher grounds and rescue platforms. And the other positive example is from a more industrialized country, Japan, this year, when the earthquake hit there. Same story. Our Japanese Red Cross colleagues tell us thousands of lives were changed. Now, one final thought, if I may directly link to your question and back to the Horn of Africa in terms of behavioral change. The question we have to ask ourselves with the affected people is, are we going to wait for these droughts to happen every 2-3 years, help pastoralist communities cope with those, and then return to their old lifestyles? Or are we going to engage in the very sensitive, difficult negotiation of needing to change lifestyles to better cope with inevitable emergencies?
A good question. You know, as I said, I'm from the South Pacific, and there was a recent hurricane that came through, and it was determined by the disaster relief people that the entire population of a certain island was probably going to be lost because of the force of this storm. And of course, after the storm, everybody came out with the typical Pacific response. They were all fine. The Pacific response was, when do we eat? They survived it all. But so the question is, how much of the indigenous knowledge is being incorporated into these multilateral initiatives to deal with disaster? I can ask that to Elena and perhaps Milan as well.
I would say not enough. I think it's a two-way street. We have we have a system every 2 years where we gather a multi-stakeholder forum called the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, where governments come together with international civil society organization, academia. And this year we had representatives from indigenous groups as a group. We have always had indigenous people who are part of one group or another, but this time we had actually a group. And in the UN, there has been a working group now set up within the indigenous rights people to look at disaster implications, but also disaster reduction and forward-looking, what you said right now, taking into account indigenous knowledge, values, capacities, and also empower indigenous peoples to take that forward into society. We have published a couple of good practice publication, etc., where we pick up on these issues, but it's about behavior, it's about changing mindset, also from the so-called civilized world, in really respecting and learning from and adapting and adopting indigenous knowledge as a wisdom, as a science, not something that's only there to be kind of showed up and then forgotten about. Take it into account, part of the governance systems of countries.
Good grief. Indigenous knowledge is science? Milan, is the bank going to be paying for any of this incorporation of indigenous knowledge into disaster responses?
Well,
you don't have to say yes. You just sort of talk around it and give
yes
us an impression
yes.
of what you think the bank should do.
The answer is yes, yes, and yes. To give you an example, and I will agree with Helena that more needs to be done, but GFDRR's as a global facility for disaster reduction and recovery, where I sit, in which the bank is one of the main partners. So GFDRR's Open Data for Resilience initiative tries to open this space at country level, at local level, by providing open source platform focused around usability, focused around data sharing, focused around engagement in building of communities of practice, communities that then are critical to sustain any information flows and update them, and also being on the ground, knowing the local situation, being able to provide that local angle to national, regional, global layers of data and of knowledge that is so critical to be able to respond to both natural disasters and, to be really frank, adaptation to climate change. Both disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation are always location-specific activities.
Matthias, are you getting the data? Are you getting the information that you need so that the Red Crescents and Red Cross organizations can respond quickly and well enough?
I would say the answer to that is yes, increasingly so. I would say actually the problem is an overflow of information. The real challenge, I think, is to properly analyze and process information into meaningful action. And I think that's linked to your previous question, a combination of using indigenous knowledge, including knowledge that has led peoples all over the world to cope for centuries with changes in the environment, but also bring in the science. So I think it is about a partnership between science and local communities, and some of us as intermediaries there. And again, the issue is not so much is the information there. I think the issue is analyzing it and translating it into action.
So do you see a role for Eye on Earth in surfing this tsunami of information?
Yes, I do. If we channel it again into something that we can take to Rio +20 in terms of what difference will it make in the lives of vulnerable people. I think just celebrating available information and technology that comes with it on its own will not make a difference. We need to really translate it again into how do we connect with people who need it so that they can not only cope on the basis of their indigenous knowledge but use science to improve their lives.
So we've got to get Eye on Earth to Rio +20, right?
We definitely do, and I think it's great that we're here discussing these kinds of issues in a sense as a preparation for Rio 20 plus. So I think all of us thank the organizers for this opportunity as an important step, in fact, between other events like COP17 in Durban last week, the summit on aid effectiveness a couple of weeks ago, and Rio. I think this is another milestone in a journey of trying to improve lives.
Juliana, in advance of Rio +20, tell us, what are you doing? How are you moving out the lessons that you've learned so very quickly and so very effectively to other parts of the world which perhaps do not have the connectivity?
One of the key things is, if I may touch on what the gentleman from the World Bank said about engagement, is that it's really important to listen to the crowd, and that includes areas where you could use SMS. Now we're seeing some really innovative uses of this. There's OpenGeo SMS, and one of the first simulation projects will actually be in Samoa, where Android phones will be pre-installed with software where you can indicate via SMS where you are and what sort of assistance that you need, and perhaps if you have indigenous knowledge about how to prepare for an impending disaster. So that's number one. Number two, just to pick up on the issue of information overload. So we've been talking a lot about data collection and aggregation and contextualizing all of that data. In one of the working groups, the issue of information overload came up, particularly the one under technical infrastructure. It's something that we discussed at length. At Ushahidi, we're making the next generation of open source tools that will allow you to deal with this influx of information. We're calling that technology Swift River. So perhaps with that metaphor of tsunami, with the Swift River, when you start listening to the crowd, a trickle of information can quickly become a flood. A preview of the software will be available in a few weeks and early in the year to be tested. And the idea is to collaboratively gather information, but to also collaboratively organize that information so it's useful, and we hope that it can also help with actionable information. So that's what we're doing at Ushahidi.
What's the www?
www.ushahidi.com.
What would you tell Milan from the bank? How would you tell them, look, you've got a certain amount of money, this is how you should use it to ensure that people at the grassroots level can respond effectively to save their communities?
I think it's the early warning systems that would greatly benefit not only organizations like Red Cross, but really empower people on the ground to look at the data that they're gathering, but perhaps to explore the local solutions. So I'm sure there are a lot of demands on the World Bank's money, but some of it can really go into the infrastructure that can benefit other organizations, and more so it can benefit issues around the environment, which frankly do not get enough impetus or enough investment really, because there's a lot of you'll get a lot of press or attention when you talk about health or mobile phones or whatever, but issues of environment frankly needs to be top of mind. How do we get that? How do we make that outreach so that people are aware of, one, their impact on the environment, and two, what they can do? What is the one thing that they can do that is local to their community and that they've also identified is important to them? And I think that's it's something that has been a theme at the Eye on Earth Summit, and something definitely to take into Rio.
Helena, what are you going to be taking to Rio Plus 20 in terms of texts and calls to action?
Well, first of all, know your risks. Take account, identify your risks, and do it locally and nationally. We have global risk models. We need global risk models, but we definitely need capacity to capture data on historical losses and scientific data as well on hazards, on vulnerability and exposure, locally, nationally. This is one key message. Another key message is that this data and this information and analysis of risk is an impetus for development planning and sustainable development in the long run. Where to build what, how, with what people, how to empower people through information to take some decisions on a shared responsibility. Those are the two key messages that we will take, and that this is a shared responsibility across society, local governments, national governments, civil society, academia, and of course the international community.
As you know, we had about as much time for this panel as it takes from the early warning system to tell us before the tsunami hits. So I'd like to thank the organizers for giving us a little bit extra time. So I'll take that as your summary statement. And I'm going to end with Juliana later. But Milan, what would you like to say in summary, in a mouthful of English?
Well, my takeaway messages will be two. The one is that this is an incredible opportunity. What has been presented, and I have a feeling what we'll be presenting in the next day is truly impressive in terms of level of achievement, in terms of level of technological innovation, in terms of level of sheer brain trust that exists in this area. It's also a challenge, and that's the second message, how we can focus that so that it is meaningful to where it matters, where it's meaningful at national level, it's meaningful at local level. The early warning systems, even the best early warning system is as good as the last kilometer, basically the last mile of it. So how we can bridge and take all that incredible technology that exists and that has been showcased here, and the potential of even further mobilization down to this last mile.
Thank you. Matthias, what would you like to tell the Eye on Earth people?
Well, my main thought is
you
really...
can't fundraise here, you know.
No, I appreciate that. My main thought really is that Eye on Earth is a very good slogan, which we should keep alive, because it tells us that we need to keep an eye on this Earth with everything that's in it and on it. It's not just about nature, or it's not just about people. I think in Rio 20+, we may be looking at sustainable development mainly through a people aspect, and as Juliana and others said earlier, we cannot do that without looking at the environment. So really, let's take from this an integrated way of looking at things that brings together the science and the people affected, that links up different aspects of what make our life not so sustainable, from environmental ones to health issues, etc.
Link science to the people. Excellent. Juliana?
Just to echo the linking science to the people, the realization that information flow has changed, that it's no longer just a one-way conversation, that we now have the opportunity, using the technology that we have right now, to engage in a two-way conversation and engagement on not only matters of environment, but other matters too. So technology is probably about 10% of what needs to happen. The rest of what needs to happen, and why the Eye on Earth Summit is really great, is convening. I don't mean to regurgitate the banner, but to converge, but really collaborate. And that takes government, it takes organizations, and it takes volunteers. And not just sometimes people think volunteers are amateurs, but really we have volunteers who are experts in providing information. So things are a bit more complicated now, but it gives an amazing opportunity to really look at what the problems are and to craft solutions that go two-way, from the bottom up.
Juliana, thank you. As we close too, I would like to thank Khalifa Razan for so elegantly and intelligently bringing this whole process together with, of course, the help of the ruler of the Sheikh, and also especially for giving form to the vision of Sheikh Zayed, may he rest in peace, who saw that this little part of the world could be an oasis of knowledge and information which would benefit not just the Gulf, but all the peoples of the world. And I think we're seeing that in Eye on Earth today. And also, just in closing too, we always look to the heavens for help when something's going wrong. And it seems to me that with this huge amount of technology, most of it I don't understand, joke, that this plus the richness of the indigenous people, of you, the individuals, the people, that we're crafting together something which, it's going to be in the sky, we call to the heavens, and if it's done properly, with commitment and with will, we could in fact be seeing our first guardian angel. Shukran.